everyone, I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yacker. My guest on today's show, who I'll be yakking with, is Cheryl Costa, author of the UFO Beat, the New York Skies column, July 2013 to June 2019. Cheryl Costa, welcome to Paranormal Yacker.
Thank you so much, Stan.
I'm so happy that you're here. Now, your book, The UFO Beat, is based on the weekly online blog column you wrote for many years for the Syracuse New Times newspaper. How did you convince the powers that be at the newspaper that articles about UFOs were still relevant and that it would be popular with the general public, which, as it turned out, it did? That has my curiosity. What was your pitch? How did you go about going to a prestigious newspaper, speaking to the powers that be there, and talk to them about your column?
Well, okay, it started really strangely. I worked for a different newspaper across town, and I was in the technical department. I made the plates every night, and I was there also if some of the electronics broke down or something like that. And I was finishing a late in life writing degree. The presses were rolling. All I had to do was wait for 2 hours for the run to be done, and we could all go home. And I glanced at CNN.com online, and there was a little sidebar story, and it said UFOs have been declining since the 1980s. Maybe they were always just an urban legend. And I looked at that and I said, you know, I've been reading this stuff for years, and I never really got public with it until after I got out of my corporate aerospace job where I had a clearance, and they kind of frowned on UFO research and that kind of thing. And I said, that feels like misinformation. For the first time in my life, I went out to the National UFO Reporting Center's website. I found some back pages, got some end-of-year totals, and I quickly threw them into a little spreadsheet. The graph from like 1980 to like 2000 went up like this. And I'm going, what memo did the UFOs get? And I thought, wow, this is cool. Over the next couple of evenings, I had never been to that site. I had never even looked at that kind of stuff other than reading articles on UFOs. I started reading some of the reports, and I kind of half bought into the kooks and nuts thing that people report UFOs kind of thing. I mean, I didn't know any better. And as I started reading it, some of these little articles that people wrote, I'd say, wait a minute, these people are just trying to get it off their chest. There's no hoaxy here. This is some people were doing something and something amazing happened, and they just wanted to tell somebody. One guy, literally, I remember one of the second or third one I read, I called the cops, they wouldn't talk to me. I called my local newspaper, they wouldn't talk to me, that kind of stuff. I took a couple of these longer narratives that were in a lot of these reports. You get 2 lines if you're lucky, and sometimes there were a little bit more narrative to it. And what I started doing was writing them up in traditional newspaper form as a little 200 or 300 word article, and I wrote them up in such a way that it was very matter of fact, just like the burglary down the street, the fire down the street, the car accident across town, that kind of thing. It's just the same way. The only thing I didn't have was in newspapers, it's who, what, when, where, why. I didn't know why, and if I did know why and could confirm it, I'd be getting a Nobel Prize. And I couldn't tell you who because the database doesn't tell you who. And later, much later, when I got the column, my editor and I agreed that since there was such a stigma associated with it, even if we did know who, and later we did, we had people calling us and sharing their stories with us, we didn't want to out anybody because of that stigma. So if you read one of my articles in there and it says Bob and Susie were in the hood of Bob's car, I made up Bob and Susie. And if he didn't tell me what kind of car, I made up the car too. But the facts of the sighting were always solid. My editors were very comfortable with the way I approached it in this very matter-of-fact way, in a way that protected. What happened was I wrote up 5 or 6 of these stories. I went to the editors of the newspaper I worked for, which was the bigger newspaper. The senior vice president editor, he looked at it and was intrigued. I made a case. I gave him a couple, 3 or 4 slides. I said, here's my pitch. Here's the demographics I think we're going to go for. And I didn't want to be in the print paper. I said, if you want to put it in the print paper, fine. But I think since we're trying to develop our web page, let's put it there. Bring the page views in. And I'd been around newspapers all my life a little bit. I was in high school. I was a cub photographer for a local newspaper. When I was in high school, my editor once told me, pictures sell newspapers, pictures of scandal sell more newspapers. And that was the approach, you know. So I said, wait a minute, page views are what drive the website of this thing. And if we can generate a big page view thing, there's a possible big anchor for a big advertiser if we got the volume to show for it. He thought about that and he ran it by the editorial board. Again, this was a big newspaper. And they all kind of laughed it out of the meeting. I went to some other editors, other newspapers around upstate New York, and I got laughed out of the office, chased out of the office, escorted to the door by security kind of thing. And then I went down to Syracuse New Times, which is weekly. The new chief editor there was a guy by the name of Larry Dietrich. And Larry had been a senior copy editor at that big newspaper, and he had taken a buyout and retired, all kind of in the same thing. So I called him up and said, can I come over and talk to you? He said, sure, come on over. It was already a buzz out there. So he said he already had an idea what I wanted to talk about. We had a cup of tea and he said, let me tell you some stuff. And he sat there and told me stuff. We're about the same age. And he sat there and told me some stuff about, you know, what he was like growing up as a kid, reading articles by Frank Edwards and some of the great guys back in the late 60s and stuff. We had read essentially all the same books. After a good 20-minute meeting of the minds, so to speak, he says, show me what you got. And I showed him my demographic stuff, a couple of sample articles. And he says, okay, we'll try you out for a month. What was fun was he sort of had that tone, if you've ever watched The Princess Bride, the dread pirate Roberts, I'll most likely kill you in the morning, Wesley, that kind of thing. He said, I'll try you out for a month. About a month later, he calls me up and says, Cheryl, come in, we got to talk. It's over with, you know. I come walking in late to this meeting, 5 minutes late because they're redoing the parking lot. It's a hard place to park out there. I come walking into the meeting, he stops talking, and he looks over at me from the conference room table where all these other columnists were, and he points over at me and says, there's our rock star. And I'm looking at him, what are you talking about? He says, you're drawing more page views than all the columnists combined. Just keep doing it, you know. He knew when he tried me out. In fact, the preface of the book, he wrote one of the two prefaces in the book. And he said, you know, I knew this was going to be a slam dunk, you know, and I was going to be a lot more interested in all the rest of the stuff in the paper, you know. So that's how it got started. Now, where the hitch is here we are 7 years later, 237 articles later. Major news services in the United States have picked up my stories numerous times. Fox News picked me up 4 or 5 times. Nobody will give me a job. I have for the past year, I have been pitching my butt off trying to get somebody to pick me up as a stringer to do a weekly or bi-weekly column for them. You would have thought that after like December 16, 2017, hey, the Navy's got these things flying over the fleet, you know, and all this stuff that has been trickling out, you would have thought somebody would have said, well, that makes good sense. Let's have that here. But no, a lot of these regional editors and news directors at TV stations are still saying, cooks and crackpot stuff. I even had a TV station in Rochester, New York, which like investigating me, find out what kind of a head case I was, you know.
Well, like I said, I feel very good about it. And I hope that a result of maybe you being on the paranormal yacker, your stock will go up even more. And people will ask you to do what I think there's a need for right now. And you present things extremely well. You saw your first UFO at an early age. How old were you? Where were you when it happened? What did it look like? And what thoughts were going on in your mind when you saw the UFO?
Previous to June of this year, I usually told people in interviews, I had my first one, I was about 12, in late August when I was 12, about 65, I think it was. And my second one was on Christmas Eve, 1971, when I was in Camp Bay, Vietnam. I was in the Air Force. About a month ago, I had a sighting that made me remember one I had when I was 14, 15 years old. And I'll tell you about that if you like. The first one was, it was a late August afternoon, about 3 weeks before school started. Rural area. We were up visiting an aunt and uncle's farm kind of thing. The corn was higher than the car kind of thing. We're coming down the dirt road. My mother has my father pull the car off the road, points out into the clear blue western sky. And out there in the clear blue western sky, there's this ball of light out there, sitting there like a rock. And to give you an idea, if you hold your arm out and look at your little fingernail, it was that big. So my mom explained to me, again, I was 12, my brother and sisters were toddlers, so they were like, you know, out of it. But mom explained to me, says, you know, that might be something the Air Force is doing. It could be a weather balloon. NASA was only 5 or 6 years old at that point. And she says, it might be something NASA's doing, you know. And then she paused and she said, you know, it might be people from another world. Got my attention, you know. We talked about it for a little bit, and my father got back on the road and we got down to the bottom of the hill, turned left to go back towards the hometown of Corning, New York. It was a big old Chevy Impala, and I crawled up in the back window of that thing, and I'm looking at them, kept asking, who are those guys? Who are you guys? Come on. And when that thing decided to go, it was like you see in the Star Trek type movies. Thing like that changes you. And anybody I've interviewed over the years doing my column, things like this, that's ever seen one leave, they say it changes you. You're just never the same again after you see something. So that stayed with me. It actually, teenage kids and mom and dad, mom and dad are stupid, that kind of thing. And I actually bonded my mom and I together that we had started getting books at the library, that kind of thing. And I'd read one, she'd read one, and then we'd share kind of a little book report with each other, sometimes with the aunts for coffee, And then what happened was, it was really weird. Eric von Daniken's book came hard copy in our household. I dog-eared on my mom dog-eared on the top of the pages, and I dog-eared on the bottom. Our book was destroyed with our dog earing. That was when I was about 17-ish. When I was 14, I remember this again. Coming out of the house, we had just eaten supper at around 6 o'clock. It was overcast sky. Just below the overcast, I saw a wedge-shaped thing moving very slow, and it had a row of lights along the bottom of it, and they would blink on and blink off. It wasn't like strobes. It was like blink on, blink off. And it was about 10 or 12 lights along the bottom of it. I tried to get my father to look up. I'm not looking up there. It's something stupid, and an airplane or something. Nobody would look. He would. The bottom line, that was really my second sighting. The reason I remember that is my spouse and I were on vacation the second week of June this year, Thousand Islands. We have access to a cottage up there, and after dark, it's a billion stars kind of thing. And my spouse was looking out the bedroom window. It's about 10 o'clock at night, a little after 10. And she said, that is not an airplane. Looked over there, by golly, there was a boomerang flying. And when he turned, coming towards the States from Canada, you could see his profile and lights blinking off. I remembered it. In fact, we were sitting there in the dark. We just gotten ready for bed. We were literally in our birthday suits, So we were sitting there saying, I'm sitting here scribbling in my diabetic notebook what it looked like and time and all that stuff. Now what would be my third sighting was Christmas Eve, 1971. I was walking down to the base chapel, go to midnight mass for something to do, and with a friend of mine, and we were walking along. Again, a gazillion stars in the western sky. Right below Leo, saw this thing streaking across the sky, and then it stopped. Wait a minute, I thought that was a jet. Helicopters don't fly that fast, and jets don't stop. Not in 1971, they didn't. I looked at my friend and I said, if that's what I think it is, I'm going to do something goofy. And it started dancing around like a little fairy, and then go on. And when we got to midnight mass, our minds were certainly not at midnight mass.
That's simply understandable. Now, certain areas seem to be hotspots for UFO activity. They attract them like magnets. Could you share where some of them might be? And why do you think it is that the reason why UFOs are attracted to these areas?
Well, okay. Nationally or in New York State?
Column A and column B. New York State first, because that's
okay. New York State, because New York State is my beat. Okay. Mm-hmm. We started collecting county data. Neither database collects county. Well, I shouldn't say it. The National UFO Reporting Center does not collect county data. In fact, I went to have work on the phone one night and asked him, "Did you collect it? Do you have it? If you do, would you display it?" He said, "No, we don't collect it. If you want to know what county it's in, put a pin on the map." I would say the end of it. Newfork does collect it, but it's dependent upon the person filling out the work. 9 times out of 10, they don't know where they are. So they might know the city or something like that, but they don't know what county. Of course, they're wrong when I have a database. So we put county data into a combined database that we built from both services. What was strange was people who were upstate New York investigators would look at us and said, wait a minute, we didn't know there was a cluster there. We didn't know there was a cluster over there either, And how did we find this? Well, a lot of places up in the rural areas are not, a lot of the little townships and things like that, they're little birds, not much more than a cattle crossing and a volunteer fire department and a general store that sells Haagen-Dazs, and that's about it. And so what's happened is a little sighting here, a little sighting there didn't look like much until you threw it against the county, and then suddenly you started seeing clusters. The hotspots are goofy. Along in New York State, New York City has a lot. Yes, the Hudson Valley is a hot spot. People down there will tell you it's a hot spot. The ground zero in New York State is Suffolk County, Long Island, and that's the plain truth. Manhattan Island, easily enough, is like right up there in the top 2 or 3. And then number 4 was Nassau County, Long Island. And then if you go up the Hudson, you get some of it spread out across the Hudson. Then you go along the New York State Thruway, and which was originally the Erie Canal. So you've got Albany, Utica, Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo. Now, it's something goofy with Buffalo. We always knew that there was this thing called the Lake Erie effect. Oh, there's tons of sightings out there at Lake Erie, Cheryl, on the Niagara frontier. That's what they all told me. It was easy to believe. But when we put the county data to it, suddenly we found out that Monroe County, essentially Rochester, almost as many sightings. The upstate New York investigators are looking at me saying, we didn't know there was a Lake Ontario effect. And there's Indian lore and colonial lore that swear that there's a city underneath Lake Ontario, which is something interesting to digest if you think about it. And I
Yes.
got part of that from the Canadian side. I got one story from the Canadian side on that, going back in the 18th, 19th century type of thing, where they thought that there was a city underneath the Ontario because of strange lights and things.
I understand. Now, these areas in New York State where there's been a lot of UFO activity, why do you think the UFOs are going to those areas and not other areas? What's about it? Is it the topography? Is it the energy there? Is it vortexes? What do you have any idea what it could be?
My digital editor was a guy by the name of Ty Marshall. And at one point, after I had this county data, I went up there and laid out stuff on one of the big tables they had up in the editorials room. And I laid it out and showed him all this stuff. And different counties had these different spikes going on. And he said, I want you to check natural resources, earthquake faults, oil, pollution, ley lines, tribal burial grounds, you name it, I want you to check. And we did. And we kept coming up short. Finally, I called Ben Moss, who at that time was the chief investigator for MUFON, Virginia. Ben, he had a terrible case of the flu, but he says, can you get yourself a Native American territories map? He said, yeah, I got some friends at the history organization here in town. He says, get one and lay it out over your areas, your thing. So, okay, fine. So I got one. I got a map, and he made a transparency of it, shrunk down to go over top of my map. And darn, if they didn't line up with all of the Native American territories in New York State. Now, if you want to know where they are in a state and why they're there in a state, the guy you need to talk to is my counterpart up in Troy, New York. His name is Tom Conwell. And off air, I'll give you his contact information. Tom has taken my data and gone out there and sort of researching all the different things that were going on. And he has found they seem to be intrigued by our brownfields, pollution sites, polluted rivers. If there's pollution there or a dead mining town or something like that, they seem to be very intrigued with our waste area. And if you talk to the people who have been the experiencers, they will tell you almost to a person, oh, yeah, ET, they told us take care of your planet.
That is intriguing what you just said. Now, you have authored hundreds of articles focused on UFO sightings. Could you share some of them? And did any of them stand out over the other? And if so, why?
I don't have the book in front of me, so I'm pulling from memory. I'll pull the ones that are very, very intriguing. I didn't, towards the last couple of years of the art column, I wrote outside of New York State as well. In New York State, it was February of 2013. I sat on the story to the end of 2013. Sat on it for a reason. I kept trying to get colleague newspaper people in upstate New York to do a story about it, and they left me out of the office when I talked to them. There was this sighting up near an industrial park up near Schenectady. People, again, this is February timeframe, it's cold, it's winter, and some people saw 3 blue lights came down, and they were coming down, and when they got close, and remember, it's still pretty high in the air, they all went together and formed one blue ball. And when the blue ball came down into the industrial park area, the little access road that was running along with local traffic on it, all the cars started quitting. Cell phone pictures, all that kind of thing, all died. People in the article, it was said that they could almost reach up and touch it. It was like about a 18 feet off the ground. It was that close. And then it started lifting up and it split park into 3 pieces, and they went off in different directions. Then the cars started turning. And I sat on that story. There was a MUFON case number for it, and I sat on it till the end of the year. And the very last story I wrote in 2013, That one has always fascinated me. I had people coming to me all the time and saying, Cheryl, you should go out there to Spook Hill there in upstate New York. It's out in Yates County. If you look up a magnetic anomaly hills, there's about 88 of them on the planet where something really weird is there. If you go up the one we have up in Yates County, and it's called Spook Hill, you can drive your car up the hill, down the hill, put your car in neutral, and it'll pull you back up the hill. If you go on YouTube, there's a picture of a state police guy getting at the bottom of the hill, putting the car in neutral, going up the hill. So people say, well, that's got to have a lot of UFOs. I pulled the data. At this point, I had a lot of data in the database. I'm pulling the data. Yates County had the least amount of sightings in the state, particularly in anywhere near that area. And it's kind of telling in itself, you know what I mean? So there's two for you right there. I don't really dwell on the Hudson Valley, though there's a lot of good ones. The problem with the Hudson Valley is that there's a number of what I'm going to call regional experts down there. So when people see them, they don't report to New Fork or MUFON. They tend to call up their local researcher, people like Linda Zimmerman, and it never makes it into the national database. So the numbers are off. I get yelled at all the time about Pine Bush. Pine Bush has got to be ground zero, and it isn't. It might be if people would report them to one of the bigger databases. There was one thing we did determine, looking up and down the Hudson, people are saying they're around water. Now, we don't have USO reports in the database per se, but there's something else that's telling. I took all the counties on either side of the Hudson, and I went all the counties that were part of the St. Lawrence Seaway, right down to the middle of the Erie, and I added up their numbers, and it was 19% of New York State sightings were along the Seaway, 31% were along the river, and right down to, this is like breaking to Long Island. I didn't follow it to Long Island. Bottom line, basically, it was like 50 or 60% of the sightings in New York State were on these two major waterways. Now, people have been telling me for years, well, there's a lot of UFO sightings around New York's Finger Lakes. No one lake stands out by itself, but if you take the county model against it and look at the combined counties, let's say you get Finger Lakes here, and you take the combined counties around it and look at it, that added another 12 or 15% to the overall thing. So they seem to be extremely intrigued by our water. There are Native American stories, right? And they put like a Indian goddess name to it, type of thing, of a particular, they used to attribute it to a particular Native American goddess. I believe it was Cayuga Lake, and later someone told me Seneca Lake as well. It would have a bright object rise up out of the lake and soar off into the sky. Well, the Seneca Lake, something very interesting about that is the Navy's been using it for deep water testing for years because it's one of the top 3 or 4 deep water, freshwater lakes in the world. And so again, maybe you got a base down there, who knows? But the bottom line is a lot of sightings around the Finger Lake. It was a cute story in the early 50s down in the Binghamton, New York area. If you want me to cut me off at any time.
I'm intrigued with this, so thank you.
Binghamton, New York area, a girl who was a member of the Girls Club, grew up to become an astronomer because of this event. She was about 5th grade. She was really into stars and the moon and positions and things like this. There's about 45 or 50 girls in there at this thing. It's late November, early December, a little bit of snow on the ground kind of thing. They came outside at 9 o'clock when the place was closing up. This big, bright orange ball came down very close to where they were, within a block of. Girls were terrified, went running back into the girls' center. The people who ran the place, oh, no, that's the moon, And the girls have been pointing over there, and the little 5th grade girl says, no, the moon is over there. That thing is over there. That kind of thing. So that was that. I had a lot of letters on that. A lot of people say, if it comes down to trusting the government or trusting the Girl Scouts, I'll trust the Girls Club, that kind of thing.
What stories you have, incredible.
It's some interesting ones. We had, I did some about experiencers up here in New York. There was one about a guy up in the, I'm going to say up in the, around the Bath, New York area back in the early 70s. And this guy was retired and out to go hunting in the middle of January or February type thing. It was cold weather. You wouldn't really stay out there more than a couple of hours, even if you're well dressed, He finds himself like late afternoon. He went out in the morning, early morning, breakfast time. That's when you go out hunting, right? And he gets back to his wits and he's sitting on a stump. His gun is laying next to the stump. And he's sitting there, looks at his watch, and it's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Heck has he been? He had almost an entire day worth of lost time. Similar one, Lake George. there were these people that were visiting a gentleman up on Lake George. He had a cabin up there and out the outdoor thing, and they saw these bright lights dancing over the lake, and they thought maybe it's fireworks or something. And that was how they pretty much wrote it off. They came up with a
Mhm.
conventional explanation. Well, they all went home. Next thing you know, he's getting ready for bed, and he notices all these bright lights around his cabin. Next thing he knows, he wakes up. And it turned out it's 3 days later, and he's like 25 miles from home, wearing somebody else's clothes. And he tried to tell the state police, and they took him to a psych ward. And it took him like 2 weeks to get out of the psych ward. And nobody would believe him that he had this lost time and all this weird stuff. And he sold his cabin and moved as far away from there as he could and moved to New York City. I want lots of people around me. Now, the caveat to that story is
Yeah.
our friend Linda Cordell was in New York City in about 89, and the ETs levitated her out of her 10th floor apartment and took her up into the spacecraft, and it was witnessed by somebody senior in the UN staff and his security detail. It was I don't want to call it a scandal, but it was quite a touchy little international incident there, that these guys witnessed this event of this woman being levitated out along with these two little ETs beside her being stuffed in this thing. So we've had some cool stuff here in New York State.
Absolutely. Now, Sir Thomas More may have been a man for all seasons, but you are definitely a woman for all seasons. A submarine sailor, a Buddhist nun, a security engineer for a major aerospace corporation, a published author and playwright. You've done it all and you're doing it all. Where do you get all this energy and creativity from?
People ask where I get this energy. It's strange. I had the nuns, Catholic nuns, when I went to Catholic school. And, if you haven't figured out by now, the viewers, I'm a transgender person. I grew up a little boy, and I won't tell you his name. We referred to him as Boy Cheryl. And he's always felt this. And so I had a knack for storytelling as a kid. And of course, I grew up in the 60s. I was fascinated with Rod Serling and Twilight Zone. And when I got to college after my first stint in the service, I wanted to be the next Rod Serling.
Cheryl, do you feel the alien beings who are visiting our planet today have an agenda? And if they do, what is that agenda? Some people feel the alien beings come here in peace, while others, I'm sure you must have heard, say quite the opposite. What is your take on it?
The people, okay, I'm going to give you two perspectives on this. Back when they announced Space Force, all the midnight comedians and everybody had people dressed up, Marines in spacesuits with laser rifles, flying through space. Think about the technology it took to get the aliens here. Most newspaper editors tell me, well, they can't get here well, it took Columbus 3 months to get here. We do it in 6 hours now. And so, maybe they know something we haven't figured out. Hell, in 1946, the idea of breaking the sound barrier was ludicrous. If you were in a polytechnical institute anywhere in the United States, Caltech, Rensselaer, any place, and you told your professor in 1938 you wanted to study rocket technology, they laughed you out of the class. And he had a documented story about that now. And so it wasn't until the Germans showed us it was useful in World War II. The technologies to get there from here, we're just starting to put our feet into it. I'll give you a little example. You know how the last couple of years we've been seeing these cartoons. Oh, you're not going to see it too well. They're like the two circles. They've been seeing a lot of artist renditions from NASA showing these two round wheels around like a thing, like a rocket type of thing. Before those things started coming out, that artwork started coming out. There was an article back in Popular, I want to say Popular Mechanics, but it might have been Popular Science. I think it was Popular Mechanics. Back, they've been doing more UFO stories than any. And Popular Mechanics had a story where they were talking to a particular NASA scientist who was working with this idea of he had these two round coils and he had these big bank capacitors, a big burst of energy through. My training in the Navy was both in electronics. I also trained in the nuclear side of things. So I have a very good physics background. And there's this experiment we used to have in physics class with the slit experiment. You put a light beam through a slit, you get two little light beams over here on a little screen. And if you put two slits, you get like 5 of them, that type of thing. When we were in school, they taught us that was called due to an interference pattern. What's causing the interference? The quantum physics answer to that is interference with the light beam, the photons going through those slits from other photons in other universes, the many universes theory of quantum physics. Well, this guy said what he was going to do. He'd worked on a year to design the experiment. They were going to have a laser beam, a laser light going through this thing, and it was being collected not only on a flat screen, but it was being collected on a computer screen where they're going to be able to analyze where those photons were falling. And that was the plan of his project. And they said, well, where did you think this up? He said, non-disclosure time. I can't tell you who told me to look into this. And what he was looking to have happen is when he energized his coils, made that energy burst, he said, in theory, there's a theory that the interference pattern with those slits was going to change, theoretically impossible. Now, where have we seen that before? There was an STS, I think it was STS-135 on a space shuttle flights or something like that. It was up there, and there was like this, it's a famous piece where you see this like little thing kind of flying out there behind the space shuttle, and then it looks like there's a beam of laser coming up from the planet, and the thing takes off like a shot. You know, it's a very famous piece of space shuttle UFO footage. You see, if you, again, television editor person, if you slow down the video and look at it frame by frame, you see this object moving along. Suddenly, 2 frames worth of almost, not a flash, it was like there's a burst. Remember when TVs were still on antennas? You remember that? And if there was a thunderstorm, sometimes as a thunderstorm is getting close, sometimes the screen was kind of white out. That kind of, it looked like a whiteout for 2 frames. Now, most people would never notice that, but somebody who's like a video editor would notice it because we tend to see things in frames. And I saw that, and I'd seen another piece of UFO footage where when the supposed craft left, just in that heartbeat before they left, there was this flash. And I said, somebody told them about this technology, and this is the physics he's reverse engineering. Okay, and a year later, we start seeing the first conceptions of this new NASA technology. We may have warp drive, you know, all this kind of stuff. And like, yeah, I know where this is. They've reversed engineered something.
Cheryl, should any of my viewers want to buy your book, The UFO Beat, the New York Skies column, July 2013 to June 2019, how do they go about doing that? Also, if anyone would like to have you as a guest speaker at their conference or special event or whatever, what is your contact information?
Okay, the book, if they want to get that, or the UFO Sightings Desk Reference, which we published in 17, it's charts, graphs, and numbers. But if you are into that kind of thing and want to know where these things are in your state or in your county, Desk Reference is cool. It's a cool book to have. We're going to build another one in 2021 as soon as we get all the 2019, 2020 data. We'll have a 20-year snapshot of UFO statistics. But the beat can be available. If you go on to Amazon.com and go to call up the part where you search for books, just put in Cheryl with a C, Cheryl Costa, and that's all you got to put, Cheryl Costa, in the book search section, and bring up, you'll see my plays, you'll see the desk reference, you'll see the beat, the UFO beat. It's a fun book where the Sightings Desk Reference is all charts, graphs, and numbers, and as my old editor used to say, it's not the kind of book you curl up in a chair with a cup of tea and read. Beat, though, that's 236 columns, and they're a lot of fun reading, a lot of oh my, ooh, wah kind of stuff. There's one thing we did in that book was we did I also put the one article that was never published. Now, I never had any censorship, but I did have an article, Spike difference. A spike is the editor said, we're just not going to run it. And censorship means we're going to change this a little bit. You know, spiking was, I had already, at the point I wrote this article, I had already developed, as my editor has put it, a sense of gravitas. You're a respected authority on this. And this snarky article you've written, we're not going to publish. So I added it in the collection to show people. And the funny thing is, it's about what happens if disclosure does happen. And I took the approach that you're going to have ambulance chaser lawyers running an ad with, if you were abducted or had cattle mutilation or lost your job because of a UFO sighting or being abducted, there's now new galactic treaties, you know, we may be able to get compensation for you.
I could see that happening.
Yeah.
Cheryl Costa, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. Speaking with you has been quite informative. You are a delightful, knowledgeable lady. And as I said at the beginning of the interview, you are truly a woman all seasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. So you don't miss any upcoming shows, Be sure to subscribe to Paranormal Yacker, my free YouTube channel. I would love for you to join me on the 1st and 15th of every month when you'll find me yakking with a different, exciting guest. I hope you subscribe today. Thanks.